I had the great privilege of awarding Shawn the Lynn Scratch Student Prize Award for his stellar series, Golden State. Part of the award was a year-long mentorship with me, but I feel I learned more from Shawn than he did from me, and I look forward to our monthly conversations about photography. Sharing work and insights with like-minded artists is truly one of the best parts of the journey. I've met many photographers over the years, and immediately I knew Shawn was someone special. He's an astute visual artist with strong ethics and thoughtful considerations of the photographic medium. In tandem with his own art practice, Shawn is a master bookmaker and now has his own imprint, Maydays Books. The first official monograph that he launched under his imprint was a spectacular effort, Zora Murph's At No Point in Between, where he made all 100 books by hand. The mission statement of Maydays Books states, from its inception, Maydays Books has been committed to raising the voices of artists who have traditionally been left off on the periphery of the fine art community by funding and hand producing a monograph of their work in direct collaboration with the artists themselves. Shawn grew up in Detroit, Michigan, a city whose civic history and geographic location has profoundly influenced the way he thinks about space within the American socio-political landscape. His videos, photographs, and in-camera large format collages are responsive to overbuilt systems, failing icons, and crumbling mythologies. He earned an MFA in photography from Rhode Island School of Design and a BA in photography from Columbia College, Chicago. He is a 2020 Wyoming Arts Council Fellow, a recipient of the 2017 Lynn Scratch Student Prize, and the 2016 TC College Grant for Excellence in Lens-Based Media. His debut artist book, A Golden State, won first prize in the Handmade category at the 2016 Lucy Photo Book Prizes, and is included in several noted collections, including the Griffin Museum, Benaki Museum, and Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago. A Golden State was also published by Skylark Editions in 2018. His upcoming collaborative project with Chase Barnes, titled The Tower, the Range, which will be released through Maydays Books in 2022. He is the founder of Maydays Books and associate professor of photography at Casper College in Wyoming. And I would be remiss if I didn't draw your attention to the upcoming workshop that Shawn is giving through the Los Angeles Center of Photography, titled Bookbinding for the Photographer, Sequencing, Printing, and Binding Methods, that runs for 8 sessions from October 2nd through November 20th. I am so excited to hear Shawn's presentation. He is really thinking about photography in whole new ways with whole new systems. And I think for a lot of you, this will be completely new ways of working that hopefully will inspire your own practice. So I would love to give a warm welcome to my friend, Shawn Bush.
All right, thank you, I appreciate it. Sorry for the digital world here. It's much different, as we know, right? I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to talk about my work. I'm honored to be with the LA photo community, honestly, because LA, as we'll see through some of my work, had such a profound impact. That space, being in that space and continually being in that space, returning to that space was really important to me. So it's awesome to connect with the community here in LA. Like Aline mentioned, I will be teaching a class, which I love. I love bookmaking. Bookmaking is the core of my heart, really. And I would love to share that with you guys if anyone is interested in that. I am going to start my presentation here, hopefully. So I live in, we'll get there that way. So it's kind of foreign to me in the current. But I'm going to talk about work that is from 2010 till 2020, so the past 10 years. But I'd like to start with this area that I grew up in, which is Livonia. Detroit is right over here. Livonia is right here. It's a suburban city, right on the border, basically, of Detroit. And this, as Aline mentioned, really shaped how I think about the social political, but also the social economic kind of climate within the American system. So this space, this little, well, it looks like they took out part of the lake there. But this square had a really big impact on how I think about systems of power, really. So Detroit, if anybody's from Detroit, maybe not, hopefully, it'd be cool if somebody was, is known as the Motor City. The Motor City is built on cars, the manufacturing of cars. And I grew up in an era where that was going out. I grew up at the decline, the beginning of like the end. So for me, investigating these kind of systems of power within my immediate social landscape, my immediate economic kind of landscape was super important to me in terms of shaping how I view the world. I was also at this point in my life at high school, I was taking global education, which was a different course that was outside of the normal kind of history of America gamut. So it gave me a specific sense about where me as a white man, me as an American man, sit within all these systems of power within a global context. Very, very important time in my life. Things that I realized and did not realize at the same time. If we look here, I have a graph. I'm sorry about the pixelization here. I tried to find a better version, but could not. We can see this sort of dotted line. That's Detroit. So white flight, when I was young, right when my parents were buying a house, was at its prime. So my parents grew up in Detroit. They were part of a mixed community, but at that point, within culture, after World War II especially, white people started to flee the city of Detroit, which is a very large city, and go to these suburbs, which is where I grew up. So this kind of graph, this sort of ant line, is indicative of my interest. So I grew up in a white society, a very white society, and I knew that. And I wanted to kind of expand my breadth of what is and what is not American, the systems of power that exist to kind of perpetuate the hierarchy within society. But this graph, I like to show this because this graph is so important. If we look at Detroit compared to Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Cleveland, Buffalo, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, segregation was such a large part of that syntax, that formula, that I had to reconcile with that. And that's something that I reconciled with as a youth, but also as of now. So after moving from Detroit to Chicago, I attended Columbia College, which was around here somewhere, and began my interest within photography. I began to think about photography in different ways, but also just kind of go through the paces, I guess I would say, within this context. So during this time, I began to work on a body of work called The Process of Meaning and Worth, which, looking back at it now, was kind of the base of me looking at semiotics within American culture. So the symbols that mean something within American culture. This was that beginning. But after that, I moved to San Francisco. So between 2010 and 2012, I was working at Playboy magazine as a studio assistant, setting up lights, making test images, keeping all the creeps out of the studio, all sorts of different things. But I was still working on this body of work, The Process of Meaning and Worth. So I continued this work from undergraduate education to beyond that, which I think is important to note, because a lot of the times when we go into perhaps the educational environment, we assume that a body of work is going to grow and then kind of stop. But it's never the case. It always extends. So I extended this work. I graduated in 2010, and I finished the work in 2013. So I continued it for 3 years in Chicago and outside of Chicago. What I'm going to show here is a video kind of photographic flip through of the book itself. So it's pretty traditional in how it's constructed. Pause it. We have white margins, blank page. It's a pretty simple book. But for me, it was a really big step in my career, because I began to understand relationships, how relationships could be formed between images. Now we have all sorts of texts that can do that for us, but at this time, for me, it was kind of new territory. Also during this time, let's see, I began really to explore the book format. So up until this point, I was a 3-year undergrad, whatever that would be called, junior, senior, whatever, junior, and really didn't find worth in my images. It was all being taught under the realm of the great image. It wasn't about finding relationships between images. It was more about making the great image. And for me, the book was the space that I could take all of my perhaps subpar images and put them together to create a cohesive statement. And I'm stopping around here, at least, because it was a really important part in my bookmaking journey, was right here, was working in the book format, working with the traditional hardcover book, foil stamped book, you know, what we know as like some antiquated pillar of definition of status within the photographic community, but then trying to kind of circumnavigate that. So this kind of gatefold, this double gatefold here, was the beginning really of my photographic journey via book. So in this sequence, we can, hopefully my computer is fast enough, we can kind of see how we start here and we have all these missing dog signs. And then it goes to this kind of expansion of those dog signs. So you can kind of feel what the owner perhaps was feeling in that moment. And that emotive feeling was really important to me within this space, because I don't view these particular images as emotive, but I view that particular part of the sequence as very emotive. So it hit my heart. And perhaps that's me as a dog lover and dog owner. But the book at this point was very, very important to me, and it still is. So this book is a culmination of my undergraduate studies. I would have never, ever, 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 ever made a connection between this image and that image or those images without having guidance. And I want to make sure I acknowledge that. I was lucky enough to work with Paul D'Amato at Columbia College under the documentary 1 and 2 program to produce this book. And this book was made as a thesis kind of exhibition for the class. So really, Paul D'Amato is the seed that sprouted my investigation into books, which I cannot help but thank him for. And I'll talk about more about him in the future. So after working on my own work post undergrad school, I brought this same book to Filter Photo in 2013. I didn't know how it would be received. I didn't know if the art community would care, anything. And I just wanted to figure it out. So I went there and I met David Bram and Jennifer Yoffe, who were working with Fraction Editions at the time. And I shared my love and my passion with the book to them. And they were gracious enough to kind of bring me on as a designer. So I designed several books for them, which was a really, really important part of my journey as a bookmaker, but also as an educator, also as an artist. It really informed the whole. So here we see Donna Mueller's Maydays. This is probably my favorite book that I've ever worked on. It is. Outside of the Deus book space, because me and Donna really connected with her design. So we can kind of see a little bit here. There's the whole book is gatefolds. So it's a fold and then a page and then a fold. So the whole book is about hiding and revealing. It's a beautiful book. I'm honored to have worked on it. I also worked on other books as well that were perhaps a bit more traditional in their construction. So Kent Grove's Speciation, Terry Bright's Sonnets, Cody Bratt's Love We Leave Behind. So they're all pretty similar. I would think of these books as a reflection of what I was doing prior. And not so much of a reflection as to what I was interested in the future. So hold on one second. I'm sorry about this. Okay, so here I moved. I went from San Francisco, where I was living, to Providence, Rhode Island. So between making books for other people, making my own books, and starting new work, which I'll talk about, I decided that, and this was a month after I got married, fortunately or unfortunately, that I was going to go to graduate school. A big reasoning of that was I want to teach. I want to connect with artists. Doing what I'm doing right now, talking to artists via Zoom, email, Instagram, any way possible is super important to me as an artist. And I wanted to continue that. It's something I didn't have in San Francisco working as a graphic designer for corporate kind of America. So coming here was really, really, really important to me in terms of my trajectory, which is why I'm showing it. I'm also showing maps for a certain reason. So during this time, what I'm showing here is images, documentation of books. So all of these books I did not make. These are all books of my students. I was lucky enough to design and teach a class called Bookbinding for the Photographer, very similar to what is happening at LACP, to where photographers can find their voice within a book format, kind of as I did. And during this time, we can see here there's all sorts of different designs. During this time, I was really interested in materiality, and how the tactileness of the book form could inform the image and conceptual nature of the book itself. And that was a huge part of this curriculum. Not only the curriculum for my students, but the curriculum for myself. So during this time, this was 2 years of my life, and it was pretty quick. I had access to lots of resources because I paid for them. One of them was special collections. So special collections at RISD was a library above the library that had all these artist books that were really artist made. They weren't made by mass production. They were made by hand. And I found so much merit in that. But also across the hall was the material lab. So I could take my students and myself to a space that had unique artist books, and then we could move across the hall and we could go through bins of non-book materials and think about how we can make them into a book, which is really powerful for me, because the material aspect, the aspect of the book where you can touch it, you can feel it, it's not like a print on the wall, was super absolutely important to me at that time. And I was really lucky to be able to share that with my students. And what we see here is just a small kind of sample of what was made. But I never taught this type of binding. It was really amazing to see these students kind of take these ideas and be able to translate it to their own work. I found that very powerful. Something as an artist myself is something I do, but within a educational format, it was very unique. And I feel very lucky, extremely blessed to be able to have that opportunity. So here, oops, on the left, we can see a book that is clothed with fake suede, which is a non-traditional material. On the right, we can see this kind of, I'm not even sure what to call that, chameleon kind of reflective front was not a traditional material. That's actually for cars, but we made it work for books. And that was a big part of my learning as an artist, but also as an educator. I feel very lucky to be able to have been in that situation. So at the same time, I was working on a Golden State. So prior to my graduate education, this was kind of my mediation within photography. I worked as a designer. I was told to move, text 1 pixel and things of that nature that just didn't align with me. I had to work in marketing. I had to work in all these systems that I really didn't want to support. So working with my own work, making my own work was really important. And during this time, between grad school and undergrad, I was making this work that would become a Golden State. But why I want to show it right here is because I continued that work as a grad student. I didn't do it one-to-one. So most of my education was not about a Golden State. It was about subsequent work, which we'll talk about. But I really like showing this because it shows a bit of the kind of process, I would say. So all of these are small inkjet, laser jet books. So these are all PDFs that I made and then printed while working in San Francisco, but then made it into a book so I could feel it. And it was a really, really important time for me to do this, mostly because I needed to kind of disengage myself with whatever I was working on, which at that time was Golden State. So I began to think about the book experience in a much different way, much different than kind of a romp through images. And you can see a little bit of texture here. The texture in the book itself is presented through dried oil from the largest oil spill. So I began to use non-traditional elements and incorporate them with my own, just as I would with my students. So it translated really well in terms of my educational practice and my personal practice. But I just want to show a few images, or one image at least, from this work. So this work was all concerned with expectations of place. So I grew up in Detroit, like I said. Detroit is pretty far removed from Californian culture, I would say. And I was told all sorts of myths about place, mostly through media. It wasn't my parents that were telling me California is some sort of utopia. It was media. It was truly media that was telling me that, either through cinema, through song, through art. Something was telling me that this is the place. So I moved out there with that assumption that this is the place. This is the place that dreams happen. And I truly believe that still. I think that they can, but I don't think it's restricted to state. But I was really interested in, at that time as well, installation. So if I go back, hopefully, this is an artist edition of 10 books. I made 10 books to kind of divorce myself from continuing this work, which also I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. But at the same time, I wanted to get the work out. So I was lucky enough to go to a New England portfolio review. I forget the name exactly. Aline, you might, I'm sure you know. But I was lucky enough to meet with a gallerist, Gallery Caiaphas, Arlette Caiaphas, and show the work. So I showed the book. So this artist book right here, which is a book in a clamshell box, and then I showed prints. And I was lucky enough to meet with this gallerist, gallery owner, and show the work. And they were receptive to the work, which I was also absolutely extremely lucky for. So at that same time, when I was in grad school, I produced a solo exhibition at Gallery Caiaphas. And what we see here, this kind of ebb and flow, is responsive to the book, the layout of the book itself at that point. And I want to say at that point because it was 100% at that point. So I made my artist book. My artist book was kind of the end, the beginning at the same time, but also allowed me to kind of find these sequences. So I was able to show this work at Gallery Caiaphas, which was amazing. But at the same time, I was making new work. So I kind of talked about divorcing myself from the previous, the work in California. And that was so that I could think outside of that box, because I was so in a very, very small box in terms of how I was thinking about photography, representation, media, material, all those things. So at the same time, I was working on new work. I would consider it kind of two bodies of new work. So what we're seeing here is non-photographic based. And that was a big, huge concern of mine. David Hammonds has been just a huge inspiration to me, how we can work with material and space, that I longed for that. I know how to work with camera. That's not too hard. But working with space, working with material, working with specificity, working with installation was all hard for me. So my graduate focus kind of relied around working with material, working with image, working with text, working with systems, working with all these different things to kind of speak about what I want to speak about, which during my graduate education was all revolved around really gender and power. And it's still the same. So these pieces here, I spent much too long producing these, but these are all interested in all those themes: materiality, power, gender, form, marketing, consumerism, all these large overarching themes that are part of American culture. So these pieces, when I zoom in, you can kind of see a little bit more. This is all casted speed stick, so the deodorant for men. So I casted these letters, but also included these burnt bits. And these burnt bits, which are part of the whole, are actually a shoe by Nike, which is why I'm using a specific font, a specific language, was called the Hyperaggressor. So I was interested in the titling of a product, in relation to identity, and how I can kind of, as an artist, redact that, to kind of take that away, to perhaps navigate around the power that a brand such as Nike has over identifying oneself. And also at this time, my nephews were very young. They're still very young and very cute. They were really interested in Nike, and they made a Nike club in their school, in preschool. And I really thought about that, and how that places one within the system and one without the system, and thinking about the system as a beginning to the end. So kind of a lineage, time-based. At the same time, though, I was also interested in still life, color, redaction, all sorts of different things within the medium of photography. So I was making pieces that were counterintuitive to how I was working previously, which was in a serial manner. So I was making kind of single pieces. Here we see a piece called Baby Blues, which is a still life. So this is a traditional still life that I painted with baby blue paint, and then painted the frame, and then painted the print. So I'm trying to redact kind of these antiquated systems of defining gender, but also defining power, that was a really large part of this kind of journey for me. But also was, in the simplest sense, portraiture. Prior to this, I was not working in portraiture. It was very, very, very hard for me to represent a human. But I began to kind of open myself up to that at that point. But also at the same time, again, kind of still life. This is a still life that was made during a residency post grad school, but all of my education up until grad school informed what happened here. Again, also, archive, very simple. The image archive was very, very, very important to my practice in grad school, but also now. And I'll talk more about that later. So this is really kind of a base camp for me in terms of expanding my practice. Video, performance, all of this was a big part of this as well. So this is a still from a video that I produced in 2018. I'm performing, I'm making sets, which for me is a direct kind of correlation to my experience as Playboy, but honoring icons of American culture that assume masculinity. Really, really important part of my artistic process. So here we see a screen grab or a photograph documentation of my final thesis exhibition for grad school. And what we see here is a dual screen, so you can kind of see a left and a right. And I worked with these men for the whole 2 years I was there. And I was interested in time-based media, but I was also interested in how that relates to the hierarchy. And this group of men that you can not see basically here, we're all competing. It's all about competition. It's all about community. And it's really important for me to kind of comment on that. So what I was doing, and perhaps it's a bit hard to see, you can see the teeth a little bit more down here in the outline of the jaw. I was rendering these men as trophies. Trophies within their own system. So the system itself is what we see here. And I would love to show this video, but it's going to take too much time and the audio is pretty intense. But I was investigating these systems of white masculinity within themselves. This is a really, really important part of my trajectory. So I view this as the key, as one of the keys kind of to my current practice. I was also interested in screens. So the vinyl that we see here, you can see all sorts of little holes up and down this. So this is a perforated vinyl film. This is what is on buses, on storefronts. So I'm thinking about this as a commercial space and the interior as an internal space. So I'm thinking about these systems of placing oneself, and they're actually kind of, in terms of value, opposite, in direct relation to the self and how we position ourselves within society, but also in relation to this system that they make for themselves, because there's a clear winner and a loser in every sort of battle that they like to describe it as. I continued this kind of screen work during my undergrad or my master's education, where I was hiding and revealing the white male identity simultaneously, but doing it through different sort of screens, at least in terms of what that front photograph with screening. So all these things, there's a lot there. I didn't resolve most of it in terms of my graduate school education. It was 100% about experimentation and expanding, which is interesting in relation to where I find myself now, which is Casper, Wyoming. It'd be interesting if anybody that is listening now knows where this space is, because I didn't even know where Wyoming was before I moved here. So after graduate school, I was presented the opportunity to teach full-time here at Casper, photography and foundational art, which I find really, really beneficial. At that same time, though, I was presented the opportunity through Skylark Editions to take a Golden State and make it into a book. So a book that was not 10 copies, it was 100 plus copies. So here we see kind of that transition, I would say. So you saw a video over here, me stamping the books, whatnot. The background is artifacts of that stamping process, but I like to show this because I made 100 plus books on my kitchen table. And I think that for me I know it was a very strong indicator that, one, I could start my own imprint in some manner. I could have an agency to create small editions of books in a handmade manner, but also that I could just do it. My graduate school education was all about the wall, about installation, about gallery space, about video, about performance, about all these other things that the book was often overlooked. And that was honestly my strong suit throughout. So this kind of prompt to make a Golden State was really, really important. And here we can kind of see, very slow, I'm sorry, how kind of a foil is stamped onto a book itself. So it's a thin medium that is put onto the book. It's put down through a die, which is warmed up. I bought this machine as I was moving from Providence to Wyoming, because of the book, but also because of what I saw as the future, which I'm going to talk about more. So I made all these books by myself, 100% by myself, in my house. Part of that, of the book design, let's see if this loads, was the laser cutting. So I became interested in materiality, user experience, opacity, layers, all sorts of different things within the book environment that I kind of overlooked, I would say, prior to my master's education, and tried to employ that into my book. So this is a title page to the book itself. So it's the first page in the book. And this is something that I did when I was at RISD, when I had access to a laser cutter. But now I find myself in Wyoming and I want to do the same thing. I don't want to print it. It needs to be a whole. And I had to find my kind of connections, which was also important to me because I have no idea what Wyoming has to offer other than Yellowstone. So learning that these spaces, I can find a tool like this, I can work with this, was super important. But it also translated to the book itself. So you can see here how that translates to the final product of a Golden State. So this was produced by Skylark Editions in 2018. I'm going to flip through a video real quick, hopefully, of the book. So this is the book, effectively, minus material, minus print, minus all of the things that make books honestly so great. But you can see how the sequence is kind of built up. I'm interested in a specific visual language within this, but also this is a visual language that I was building up prior to my graduate studies. So I think of this visual language as a catalyst to where I'm at now, which is why I'm showing the lineage of my work, because it all informs the next. So this work was all concerned with California, the mythology of place, what was told to me through cinema, things of that nature. It's pretty simple, but at the same time, it's somewhat poetic. So this is what the book looks like as a physical object. So again, I made all of this. The text blocks were sent to me printed, and I did the rest. In this image, I like to show because you see a slight highlight here. That highlight is actually from a varnish. So all of these images, just the image itself, so the border, were varnished, which means there was a clear substrate added to the top of it so that the color was more vibrant and the blacks were more deep. Also, that little bit of varnish alluded to a screen, which for me was really, really important in terms of why I was interested in photographing California in this manner, was because I saw it through the screen. I saw it through media. I saw it through song, and trying to relate that experience back to the physical object. So here we see the special edition of a Golden State from Skylark, which comes in a clamshell box with a print. And I want to stop again to kind of thank Skylark for working with me, because Kelly, Greg, Paul, they still are all people that I look up to. So to be able to look up to these people and then work with them meant so much. And I had other offers to work with this work with other publishers, and it just didn't mean anything because there was no intimacy. And that's really important in terms of how I approach the book. Intimacy is integral. So at the same time, I'm working on a new body of work called Between Gods and Animals. So what we see here is an artist mock. I'm still interested in materiality, form, design. Here we see a silver gelatin print of John Wayne. So I'm thinking about all these kind of antiquated symbols of masculinity and power and trying to redact them through value, basically. So printing him down past the point that he can be printed. And then also photographing John Wayne on the screen. So it pixelates. It's hard to tell from this cell phone image, but you can see the structure that makes up John Wayne through the image itself. This work is grad school, post-grad school. It's something I've been working on for a while, but also have been lucky enough to show the work and have opportunities to publish the work. So here you can kind of see how it opens up, hopefully. And it opens up flat so that it feels like a document. It feels like we're kind of staring at something that was given to us that perhaps shouldn't be, which is also part of the title page if that comes back up. So the title page itself is a redaction of a Trump speech, where I kept the words in the words only of the title, but it's on a gray page with white redaction. So the white redaction is a large part of that. Perhaps we're used to seeing redaction through Sharpie and things like that, but it was more about this being white and having this white redaction, redacting whiteness at the beginning of this sequence. Also in this book, we're going to look through a PDF real quick, but there's all sorts of small pages that kind of work as mini sequences and reference Greek mythology, really. So I'm really interested in Greek mythology and how Greek mythology can kind of support and reference the assumption of the American male, the American white male, especially, only. So here we see the sequence here of the book. This is an old sequence, though. I want to note that. This is from October of last year. And since this sequence has been established, since the artist mock has been established, I've been lucky enough to work with Void out of Athens, Greece, to produce a monograph of this work. So we're working on making what I have here a viable book, because some of the things that I do as a publisher, as an artist, as a bookmaker are really expensive in terms of an edition of 200, 500 bucks, which is why I operate in a certain type of manner within the book, because I have those skills. But I'm working with Void right now to reconcile this book and try and find a happy medium about how it can live in terms of the book itself, but also in relation to some of these smaller kind of book sequences where there's smaller pages. So kind of what I'm talking about right here. Publishing can be a problem when you introduce different materials and different sizes. So with this book too, I'm interested in materiality, which I'm going to talk a lot about with Deus books, but also interested in image. So these pages right here are a quarter of the weight of the actual book pages. So when you come to this sequence, when you come to the rocks, the fire, you feel it. You pick it up and it feels fragile. And that was really, really important to me in terms of the book itself, at least this book. Again, I don't know if that's going to translate to the produced object, but we're talking about that. Hopefully it will. At this time, though, again, I mean, if we go back through the past all my slides, I'm interested in books. I really like books. I really enjoy books. I like the form. I think it's a good space to meld concept, user experience, and materiality. And I decided to start my own imprint, very small imprint, with the help of Aline. Thank you. To kind of do this, to have the confidence to do this. So I made my books through Skylark. I made 100 books. That was really hard, but it was a good experience. And I knew I could do that. I knew I could continue that. I don't have to pay a publisher to do everything. I can do some of my own stuff. But also highlight artists that I think need to be highlighted, which are artists that are outside of, in reality, the white male gaze. So artists that are of color, artists of the LGBTQI community, artists that are just not getting represented for some reason or another. And that's also something I learned in grad school, is that as a white male, I feel fine, and perhaps that's just me, applying to different things. But there's communities that don't feel okay applying to different spaces because of how the space is constructed. So I really wanted to construct a neutral space where I could showcase artists of color, women, all sorts of different communities that were not just white men. Not my goal. So I started this in 2019, and with the help of Aline, I contacted Zora. I had been on his radar for a while after looking at his work, but also judging the Lens Scratch Student Prize the next year after I won it, and seeing his work. It was so amazing. And I remember, Aline, maybe you remember this. I remember saying, the work is so good, it just needs to be turned around a little bit, like one image to one other space. So me and Zora began to work together and create what his subsequent body of work was, which is at no point in between. It looks like I'm not loading here. But it was a really important step for me, because up until this point, I felt that my space was it was very defined. It was very small. But now I could expand this. I could take the skills that I learned as a bookmaker, as a book designer, as a book artist, as an artist, and put them into a realm that I want to support, that makes sense to me. Because many of the times when I was working on previous books, I didn't have much say. I was really working. It was like I'm working for the artist, not in collaboration with the artist. And with Deus, it's all about collaboration. It's all about collaboration. So me and the artist talk once a week, every week, about the book, about what could be the book, what shouldn't be the book. And that was never a conversation prior to this. It was all about just like artist vision, because of the funding aspect, which I guess I should mention as well, is that I fund all of these books. So Zora's book is the first in the Deus catalog, but it is only one in many. And I'm funding these books. If you've ever been approached by a publisher, some publishers want $20,000, $30,000 to make a book so that you can put it in your garage, and not sell it, or try and sell it, or hustle. And I found that problematic. So I wanted to disrupt that formula with Deus in so many different ways. So I do fund every single book that comes through Deus. Zora's book is just one of them. And my computer is loading pretty slow here, but we can kind of see the influence in terms of materiality and value, reflection, all sorts of things. All of my interests within the book kind of push back into Deus. So here we can kind of maybe see the image itself. So there's a photograph and then there's a border. The photograph itself is varnished, and then the border is not varnished. So it feels like a real object. So the materiality, the assumption of materiality was all really important. Same with what we have here. Zora had this absolutely stunning pamphlet, which we appropriated with poetry. But this is something I could not do with a publisher, with a printer. I'd have to pay a lot of money to seat this pamphlet where it is. Whereas I can just kind of do this on my own, and I have the skills to put that in there on my own and kind of circumnavigate the financial barriers. So for an edition of 165 for Zora's books, it would have cost double to actually produce it if I were to have somebody else do that. So I'm really interested in material design, how material informs concept and supports concept at the same time. Zora's work is absolutely stunning. It's extremely strong, but at the same time, he had a very strong link for connecting images, but we could work together to connect material and experience. So this is something that I thrive for all of my upcoming books. And it's something that it's hard to replicate with all of the forthcoming books. And that's honestly something I want to work with. So lots of publishers publish 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books a year. I'll do one. One's all I can do, and one's all I can do right. I can do a lot more. I just want to do it right, and I want to really work with the artists to make whatever they worked on better. Huge part of my practice as a publisher, but also a practice as an artist. What we see here is a mock of a book that's going to come out through Deus in 2022, maybe 2023. I don't know at this point. Again, one book a year. But this is a collaborative project between myself and Chase Barnes. And I never set out to publish my own work. That's actually not the point. But this work is about systems of white power within the government. And I feel like it's very in line with my mission as a publisher to showcase artists of color and kind of disrupt these formulas, these syntaxes that we have established within society. So it's loading very slow, but you can kind of see on the left over here, there's a text block. On the right, there's a text block. So there's actually 2 books to this, and it's disrupting notions of reality, really. What is real and what's not real, and why. So Chase has been a huge influence for me past 5 years in his work, and I feel that it's a huge honor to work with him. So what we're seeing here is just kind of a sample of what is to come. This is the first mock of our book together, but it's starting to get some legs. Lots of still life, portraiture, all sorts of things that I talked about earlier are brought into archive, into this book, into these books. And I'm really, really excited about this, but know that within the gamut, within the lineage of Deus books, that this needs to come later for several reasons. So this kind of brings me to my current work. I don't have a title over here. This is really what I've been working on since 2020. So this is COVID work in essence. What I'm showing at the beginning here is pre-COVID, up until March or February. And then after that is all post-COVID. But this is all work that I've made during this time of uncertainty, during this time where I'm questioning systems of power within what I exist within, the tribe that I exist within. So I'm white, I'm male, I'm straight. I can walk into many of the spaces that I inhabit without having to reconcile with self. But this whole work is about reconciling with self, but also kind of looking at the immediacy of my surroundings. So I live in Casper, Wyoming. As I mentioned, Casper, Wyoming is known as the oil city. So oil production, these kind of antiquated systems of power, really. And being here is super important for me because this is my interest, but also I can kind of wear a veil over myself and walk into these situations. I can go into the museum. I can go to a rodeo. I can make images without being questioned because I'm a white man and I'm straight and I look straight and I teach at the college. So it's a really, really great place for me to make work, but it's also a really hard place for me to make work at the same time. Let me try and go back. Let's see if we can get there. It's not even worth it. So I exist within a space that is very Republican, which is fine, but also a space that's very about rights and guns and things of that nature. So before I showed an image of the George Floyd protests that happened here in Casper, Wyoming, which had 300 people, I'm happy to say. But there was lines, absolutely lines of white men with automatic rifles outside of that space, protecting their space, which for me is an absolute reflection of everything that I'm interested in, everything that is terrible about this current moment. So for me, this is a really important place and time for me to exist here as an artist. I don't know if I'll be here forever, but right now it's so rich. It's very rich. And what we're looking at here is all work from, and here's that screen again that I was using, from an exhibition that I had here in Wyoming about this work, which I actually did not talk about some of these systems of power because I fear retribution. So here's some documentation of a recent show at one of the galleries here on the college, where I presented some of these works. So they're all silver gelatin prints, 16 by 20 inches in walnut frames, pretty simple. But then I also made these collages, which are a reflection of kind of the uncertainty that I would feel in the current, as a reflection of digital media as well. It's kind of floating within space. So all of these are all on 3 panels of glass. So there's actual images, there's perforated images, there's film, there's all sorts of media in here. And this was kind of my first investigation, or recent investigation, into collage, which translates to what I would think of as my stronger work, which is my newer work, which deals with collage and photography. So during this time, I was working with collage duality in terms of a printed space, like a very defined space. And outside of that, I wanted to kind of disrupt scale because, as I mentioned, I was working at 16 by 20 inches for the silver gelatin prints, which works, but also I was limited to scale. So these collages, these images were all a result of scale, one scale. And I wanted to disrupt that. I wanted to print as big as I want, if I want to. So I began to make collages inside of the camera, which is what we're seeing here. So 2 kind of images here. this also allowed me to play with time, really. But all of this is an investigation really into the systems of white power that I was interested in, but also the immediacy of my surroundings. So I see coal, oil, perhaps not natural gas, but closer to natural gas, as systems of power that are antiquated, that are dying, that are a reflection of whiteness, white maleness within our culture. So I began to kind of think about collage within a 4x5 inch negative format. So these are all 4x5 inch negatives. So I'm trying to take what I'm doing in the darkroom and put that on negative, which for me was a really awesome exploration, because at this point I was going online teaching. I could work in the studio by myself. I could process by myself. I'm lucky to be the only photo faculty here in Casper. But thinking about how I can translate the collage space from the silver gelatin photographic print to a negative, to where I could print this as large as I want. So between March and now, I've been kind of investigating this space, also using archival imagery, photographic imagery. This is an image I made. This is an image I made. This is not an image I made, to kind of conflate space and time. Here's another example, very simple kind of collage. So it's 2 exposures. It's 1 exposure, 2 exposure, not too aggressive. But I began to kind of expand upon that and work with layering, work with positive, negative space, but also kind of complicate the narratives within said image. So up until now as well, I'm used to the book. I'm used to the book format where I can put 40 images together and make sense of an idea. I'm trying to do that more in a single frame. Again, kind of a collage. This is an example of a collage that went wrong, but I remade several times until it was right, and I like the wrong version. So a lot of experimentation within this. In terms of the collages, it perhaps might be hard to think about the construction. So I like to show this just because what I do is I make a digital collage. So this collage I make on a computer. I take pictures with my phone. I know where it's going to go. And then I make masks for those images, for where they will sit, and then put those in the camera actually on the film. So what you see here in the background was placed on the interior of the dark slide, on the film itself. So I'm working with masks in different ways. So here we can kind of see mask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how those kind of interact. Some is paper on film, some is foam core that is placed in the camera, and then it makes an image like this. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 exposures within this frame. So I have to kind of make a system for myself to make these collages, but a lot of this has to do with my desire to inform with the book, but do that through a single image. I'm starting to kind of experiment with redaction, chemical burns, all sorts of different things. But as of recent, I'm kind of returning to photography after doing several studio visits and getting feedback that perhaps some of the photos were doing the same thing, but in a different manner. So I'm trying to collage, hide, reveal, do different things with my photography. Again, kind of collage here. So this is 4 exposures, where I'm trying to reference nanorods, which are what you look at when you're looking for gold, so value, but also looking to kind of make scientific imagery. A lot of this new work is scientific in its nature, but making my own kind of quasi experiments. I'm really, really, really very influenced at the current with scientific imagery, with user manuals, with product manuals, with the vernacular of that. And I'm trying to do that with this new work as well, but also kind of comment on the history of whiteness and landscape and photography and power within this kind of gamut. So this is a beginning image for me, where I'm going to be going to this Ansel Adams wilderness and kind of redacting and reinforming what he saw. But also, I talked about the archive a little bit with my graduate work. Right now, I'm going back through my archive, my own archive. So this is an image that I made, I have no idea when, probably 12 years ago. But going back in and reimagining my own archive and then reinterpreting it. So this is an image that I made 12 years ago, and this is an image I made on Monday. But then kind of reinterpreting that again in terms of whiteness, sharpness in terms of the current and the past. So kind of conflating the two as well. So the archive is a really, really big part of my current interest, my own archive, but also an expanded archive, which hopefully we'll see in a second here. So the archive, Aline, I know you're looking at similar archives, but I'm responding to that in terms of the printed archive, in terms of the light, in terms of everything. So these are all 3 prints that I made this week, kind of looking at this granite space as viable, as a benefit, as beneficiary, as monetary. But in response to the archives that I actually purchase. So these are purchase negatives and these are not. So the way that I'm constructing my current narrative is directly in relation to what really is the 1960s. So I see, and here you can see a bit of that archive. That's about 1,500 negatives. I'm trying to conflate the 2 spaces, juxtaposing eras in terms of white maleness, to interrogate systems which really have memorialized and recycled this kind of androcentric ideology about American culture, where the white male is the beginning, the forefront. So I'm trying to take this archive and respond to it in a manner that I can conflate time. So on the left here, this is a found image. On the right, that is an image that I made in response. Same over here. So left image is a found image, an image that I purchased. I own this negative now. And then kind of playing with that similar vernacular with my own imagery. So I'm really interested in, with this current work, the same themes that I was with my graduate work, but connecting this to the society that I live in. So this society that places oil, gas, all these coal, Trump, whiteness, maleness, all of these systems of power at the top. This is what I'm I'm directly involved in, and this is directly what I'm responding to as the current. So hopefully that gives an idea of what my trajectory is and perhaps will be in the future.
Thank you, Shawn. That was amazing. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Sure, yeah.
We have some questions, and we're already over time, so you might need to be a little succinct in your answers. I just wanted to share with those in the group is that I had a chat with Shawn last week, and I had found some incredible images on eBay that were so Shawn, and I pulled them off to show him that maybe he should buy them. And it turned out that we were actually mining the same vendor on eBay for vernacular photos. So that was pretty amusing.
Mm-hmm.
So let me start off with Mark in the audience has asked, tell us about book tools and printers like Blurb and A&I, and what about publishing to Amazon? Do you know anything about those?
Yeah, those are all really great questions. I think a lot of it has to do with one's goals with the book, what that's going to reach. Amazon is kind of the Walmart of the online marketplace, right? So we want to exist there, but also at the same time, you have to know where your audience is. And sometimes that is outside of the Amazon space. And I would really, for any artist that is emerging, that is making a book, perhaps in a small edition, to not work in that space, because it's going to be a really competitive space, and it's going to be one that kind of cuts you off at your knees. So there's ways that you can do that on your own website, through social media. Blurb, I think, is a great space to proof books. But anybody that's worked with Blurb, you know that there's parameters, right? You can only work within this and that. And for me, at least for me, the beauty of the book space is not having to work within those parameters, to have those parameters really expanded. But I do think Blurb, print on demand, a lot of these places are really, really, really fantastic, absolutely fantastic to proof a book, to feel your book, because you see it on a screen and it's abstract at that point. When you feel it in your hands, it's a much different experience. So I think in relation to print on demand, I think it's a great space to proof a book, but perhaps not produce a book. Yeah.
Okay. How did you become both? How were you both a student and a teacher at the same time at RISD? That's from Ken.
Yeah, that's a good question. So lots of master's programs, at least the ones that are you're there all the time. I don't even know how to describe that. They often present opportunities to teach your own class. So that was a big part of me going to RISD. It was to have that opportunity, but to also I went through a program called Teaching and Learning in Art and Design. So I was very specific to how I was going to teach, and that was really important to me as well. So in short, that's the graciousness of RISD to allow me to make that course. Yeah.
So everyone in the room is asking this question internally. How do you find your artists? Because we all want you to publish our books.
Right. For me, And I think this is a good comment. It's a reflection of, what curators want to see. And for me, I want to see a specific thing. I want to see interaction with the social landscape, with the photographic landscape, with certain things. So all publishers are different. I'm very, very specific about what I want. And not everyone's like that. So I guess the best advice I could give is to look at publishers and see the lineage of the artists that are presented within that publisher, and try and find the space that you can exist within that. Because the best publishers, I guess I would say, have a lineage where it's not this and that, it's about the whole that relates to the self in terms of publishing. So I would do research. That's kind of a terrible answer, but research, find a publisher that is making work that is visually similar to your work, perhaps, and thematically similar, conceptually similar to the work that you're interested in, because that's where you're going to have the most success, certainly.
Okay. So we have a couple questions about cost. How much should it cost to produce a small handmade book? And also, how much would it cost to put together or publish a book like Zora's?
Okay. It's not uniform.
Like your students, the books that your students made, those small artist books. I'm assuming those were not expensive.
No, I mean that's inkjet paper. I mean, I paid, I think, $1,000. Well, this Brisky paid for all of my artist books, thankfully. But if you're going to print it on your own, I would expect $50 to $100, depending on how many pages. Because if you're printing it on your own, you're using inkjet media, which has to be coded for inkjet media, which is more expensive than non-coded media. So it really depends. So for
go ahead.
For an artist book that is made by the artist, it's going to be more, but it's going to be more because you're making a smaller edition. Zora's books cost over $9,000 to make those books. So, and that's because the edge is painted. That's because of the varnish. That's because of all these things that really needed to be done that I did not want to compromise on. So it can go from $20 a book to 90, pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think that's the dilemma of making artist books that might cost the artist $50 to make, and they can't turn around and sell it for that price. So, I don't have an answer for that, but that is kind of a dilemma.
Yeah, for that small artist edition, I think the price just needs to be so much higher. Like the books that I've made before working with Skylark were $1,000. So,
Yeah.
They're collector's items, basically.
So I'm going to give you two more questions and then we will wrap it up. How many versions do you usually go through for a book?
It depends how confused I am, I guess. A lot. I made 20 to 30 for a Golden State. Between Gods and Animals, not as much. And with the new work, not as much. But I think that's just me understanding my visual language and what I want more. But it takes a lot. I mean, that's why the that kind of laser jet cheap book is so important, because you flip through it and you can feel it, and you know like when it's right and when it's wrong, So a lot, too much, I would say.
I think the person that asked this question is no longer here. And it was all about grad school, which is a little off topic of books. But I was curious. I had a question. And Shannon, if you're still here, let me know. Being a book designer, does that change the way you make photographs, knowing that you're making an image that will end up in a book?
Yeah, I mean, the new work is like wall and book, I would think, or like to think. But certainly, like the silver gelatin prints that I showed with the red marking around them, I printed them on the other margin so that, I had to go through and make all those other silver gelatin prints and scan them and do all that. But I do think about the book 100%. It's hard for me not to. I would like, my graduate experience was kind of trying to not think about the book, but it comes back to the book all the time for me, fortunately or unfortunately. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You've got us all thinking about books, and I look forward to your upcoming class and just continued successes in all things. And you're getting lots of compliments in the chat, so I hope you take time to read that.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone.